My new thing is drinking weak blue Gatorade because I'm trying to wean myself off the massive amounts of Coke I drank, but also because it looks like a potion. This is an ASMR channel now. Hello everyone, my name is Friedrich Sarah E. Thompson, but you can call me Fred. And today, I am finally going to be talking about the anthology that I was published in, Coppice and Break. Coppice and Break! It's a real book, it's got like a barcode and everything. I don't really have an excuse for waiting so long to make a video about the book that I was published in when the book itself was published in March, except for the fact that a lot of horrible stuff happened to me personally, like literally 4 days afterwards. And then I was like, okay, well, I have to get my brain back on. And then I was like, wait, I should actually read the book so I can get everybody else's stories before I talk about it. So I did that, and then it was like July, and it's now September in case you didn't notice. I finished reading it in July, and I was like, oh, you know what would be fun is if because I work at a library, if I got my library to buy it, and then I could be like, hey everyone, look at what I did. I got a book that I was published into the library that I work at. It takes a long time for books to go through processing. I work at the library, and even I didn't quite put that together. So if you ever order a book, ask your library to purchase a book for you because it's like new or it's like obscure or it's published by an indie press. Support small creators. And it's been like a month and you're like, hey, where's my book? If you go to the person at the front desk, all we'll be able to say is whether it has been decided whether it should be purchased or not. And then it's just like disappears into the maze of upstairs for like months. And I talk to people who work up there and I'm like, hey, did you guys get in this particular book? And they're like, I don't know. I don't fucking know. There's 7,000 of them up there. You think I know one book? I have to like wade through piles of picture books to get to take a shit. And I'm like, okay. I'm sorry about that. Thank you for purchasing. Hey. So, be nice to people who work at the library. So, this is not the first time I've been published. The first time I've been published was in a magazine, a literary magazine called Serial Magazine. They focus on classic pulp fiction. So I submitted to them a short story that was basically a Sleeping Beauty reimagining, retelling, Sleeping Beauty thing. And they really liked it and they purchased it, and that was like a full year ago. That was June 2019. And that edition sold out, which is, ooh, we did that. Congratulations, it was the special Pride Month edition too, so like, another victory for the gays. That sold out, so I'm now trying to find a new place to put that short story, Lady in Waiting, the Sleeping Beauty retelling. Very dykey. I'm trying to find a new place to publish that as a reprint. Who knows if I'll find one. Maybe it just like worked with that one lovely editor, Tanya Farrell. Thank you, Tanya, for my big break. It worked for that one editor, and it worked for that one audience, and maybe it won't find another home. And that's fine with me, because I got to be in Serial Magazine, and I got to be published. And because I got to be published in that thing, I got like a lot of confidence, and I also got like a little line I could put at the bottom of my cover letter, like, I am an established author, having previously been published in Serial Magazine. Which is like something that they always tell you to include in a cover letter. And before that, I was like, but nobody's liked my stuff before! And then somebody liked my stuff. Because of all that, I got accepted into Coppice and Break, an anthology of dark fiction and horror. The story I got accepted into Coppice and Break with, and the story that they published, because that's how this works, is called Whitetail Lies. And the title comes from when I was a kid, I had like this thing where I kept getting confused between white lies and whitetail spiders, because I don't think we even have whitetail spiders in Australia. We have a spider that's like, no, they're only in Australia. Except they accidentally ended up in New Zealand because Australians are horrible. None of that is relevant. Anyway, I associated this name of this spider with the phrase white lie, and I was talking about it with a friend of mine who has also been published. Please purchase her chapbook. I was talking about it with her and the correlation I had, and I was like, man, wouldn't it be crazy if every time you told a lie, you also told a spider into existence? So like, you'd be like, the sky is green, and be like, boom, and like a huntsman would like fly out of your mouth. And I thought that was just like a funny joke idea, and she was like, that sounds like a really interesting idea for a story. And I was like, well, so Whitetail Lies is about Georgie, who, well, the funny thing is that they came up with this whole backstory for her, and I was like, oh, she lives in Melbourne, her family's Greek, she doesn't quite get along with her parents, she's like an only child because her parents' marriage is kind of failing. None of that actually ended up in the story, because the story is about her bathing spiders every time she tells a lie. And it pretty quickly became about the sort of guilt complex you're ingrained to learn growing up. The way you're sort of like taught to be ashamed of your body, the way you're taught to be ashamed of your opinions, you know, that whole like we teach women to be smaller type thing. But I didn't want it to be exclusively just like about women. It just happened to be about a girl, because I was drawing a lot on my own experiences growing up assigned female at birth, but then growing up to realize that I was non-binary, and also that I was not attracted to men. So the story comes from a lot of my own personal experiences, and it's basically just sort of like a working through those kind of emotions as expressed through a very physical metaphor. And the sort of way you have to like, the way you're expected to lie in society, and the fact that you also sort of need to hide the fact that you're lying, because everybody expects you to lie about things and they don't want to hear the actual truth, but at the same time, if you're caught actually lying, it's horrible. And it's also the fact that the way, you know, you're expected to lie about things, but at the same time you're expected to be ashamed about that, so there's really no escaping that sort of negative self-talk, as you're forced to move through society in a way that society itself says is a negative thing. So yeah, it was basically exploring those sort of feelings in a horror, dark fantasy, urban fantasy kind of way, because like Georgie lives in like this fictionalized Melbourne, which is where I was born, and she's just sort of like trying to get through high school, and she's just graduated in the like action of the story, and her friends are going out to drink and stuff, and obviously with alcohol there's the loosened inhibitions and the fact that you're lying, and she's sort of coming to terms with like where she fits in like a social scheme, and bathing spiders along the way. So if you're interested in that sort of discussion of like what it means to be a person in society that's very contradictory of itself, and if you have experience with that sort of guilt complex, I highly recommend checking out my story. And even though it is in a horror and dark fiction anthology, it doesn't have like a bad ending. It's just weird because she will make a noise with her mouth, and that noise will turn into a spider on her tongue. So it's not exactly gonna end up in a fluffy feel-good kind of magazine, but it did end up in a collection of stories that are weird and thinky. That's really the only way I can describe the sort of lingering feeling that these stories have in common. There's a lot of very different settings. Some of them are set in modern day, you know, like I said, like a fictionalized Melbourne. It's basically exactly the same as any other city that you could go to. It feels exactly the same as normal, except some weird shit is happening to a specific person. And some of them are set in like very obviously fairy tale times, at least two of whom that I really liked. There was Raph and the Scissorfinger and The Red Shoes. Both of those are excellent sort of examinations of traditional fairy tale tropes. And that's something I adore. I just said that I first got published with a fairy tale retelling, and now I'm in here reading this weird introspective look at the mechanisms of how fairy tales work in Raph and the Scissorfinger. And in The Red Shoes, you get a very personal, traditional novel introspection look at the life of the evil witch who lives in the cottage and needs children. Lives in the cottage. She lives in the woods, a cottage in the woods. They're both a really interesting look at how like fairy tales work and the sort of things that are left out of fairy tales. You know, the people who slip through the cracks, the people who exist to be more as archetypes than as characters. And that's something I really love exploring. And like I said, the whole theme of this collection is stories that sit with you longer than you might expect. You think about them after you're done. It took me a while to get through it actually, even though it's quite slim. And the stories themselves aren't too long at all. Like the last one is the longest, Most of them are under 10 pages, but just it uses a lot of brain cells. Not necessarily in the way it's like, oh, what's going on there? It's sort of like what are the implications of that? Oh, why is this evoking such a strong emotional response in me? Oh, I've never thought about anything from that angle before. And it's something that you enjoy thinking about as you go through the book. And so you sort of end up like stopping between stories and taking a little bit of extra time to get through it, which I think is a mark of an excellent collection. And I'm not saying it just because I'm in the book. I'm going to be dead honest with you. If the book sucked and I was in it, I would still be gassing it up. I'd be like, go buy this book, it's amazing. But this book is like genuinely really impressive to me with the way that it's curated. All of the stories definitely have that same sense of, I've never thought about that before. And this story makes me want to think about it more. And the way that the stories are arranged is, I think, really well set out. The one qualm I have with how they're ordered, frankly, I think like there was a really good like alteration of pace and tone and even setting. But for me, the only two stories that I didn't like were the first and the last ones. So I was just like, damn. Everything else in here like was perfect for me. And I think with an anthology that... Okay, the sun just disappeared. For me personally, I feel like an anthology is good if like more than half the stories are like okay. Because I just have like such a specific taste that when it comes to reading anthologies, particularly from a whole bunch of different authors, it's like, you know, pretty hit or miss in getting an anthology where like everything ticks your boxes. And like the amount of stories in here that I like really genuinely connected with was amazing. Like I really did not expect it at all. Aside from The Red Shoes and Raph and the Scissor Finger, which hit my fairy tale business, I also like massively connected with two stories that were very strong at LGBT themes. There was Hot Dread and Cold Slices and The Yogurt Swimmer, and both of them are really interesting because they are very uniquely gay and trans horror, and not in sort of an objectifying or slasher, horrible, gross sort of stuff. It's much more drilled down into specific fears that you have as part of the community. Hot Dread and Cold Slices talks about a young trans woman who's working as a pizza slinger in this shitty pizza shop. And the horror of the story is this weird appendage, it's like this alien geometries kind of unknowable body horror little sausage thing that lives in the shop, and it seems to be causing deaths. But the actual dread and terror of the story comes more from her life and the sort of things that she has to deal with. She's on the cusp of homelessness. She was living with her ex. She's trying to like get into dating somebody, but she's not sure like who on the dating profile is like actually interested in her as a person and who's like a chaser or who's like a creep. And she's had like severe mental health issues in the past that, you know, the sort of things that you can get better with, but they, you know, you're prone to relapsing, and that sort of happens throughout the story. That very much wavy kind of like highs and lows mental health problems that I'm personally quite familiar with. And I think it was just like a really excellent look at how real life, mundane, trying to make it in capitalism life is just as horrifying and terrible as any alien or extra-dimensional hell beast. It's a fantastic piece, and I really recommend you get the book just for that. The Yogurt Swimmer is another story that really drills down onto specific fears like that, where it's interesting. There are these weird little creatures that are kind of like guardian fairies that keep appearing in the houses of homes that are a child and a single parent, and they just sort of like take care of the kid and they help their family and stuff, and it's really sweet. And everyone on the news who like finds one of these is like, oh, it's such a blessing to help the family like this. You know, it's just been us two on our own forever, and now we have this wonderful creature that's helping out. And what's really cool about this story is that one of those little doohickeys, gremlin fairy things, appears in the yogurt of a man who's married to another man, and they have a daughter together. And the daughter isn't his biological daughter, it's his husband's biological daughter, and you know, they're her dad's and they're raising her together. But then suddenly this thing appears that's only ever appeared in single parent households. And of course he has like all of these like horrible thoughts like, do I not count as her father? Does she not love me right? Am I doing something wrong? And so he's like trying to like get rid of this thing. And the twist at the end, and the sort of revelation it casts on all the previous sort of mentions of like these little guardian angel fairies is so well done. But at the end of the story, I was just sitting there like, oh my god, my heart hurts so much. This was such a gut-wrenching ending. It's so well done, and it like really sort of like left my ears ringing with like emotional turmoil after reading it. It's fantastic. I highly recommend it, but I don't recommend it if you're already depressed because it's just gonna make it worse. There are a lot of great stories in this collection that do stuff like play with perspective and have twist endings, or not necessarily twist endings, but endings that change your perspective on the story you just read, where you sort of realize that things weren't quite as you were led to believe. There's a lot of excellent unreliable narrators or ignorant narrators, and there's a lot of like perspectives that you don't normally get in short fiction or genre fiction as a whole, or at least they're not usually the sort of blockbuster perspectives. There's another standout story for me is the Terracotta Daughter, which is sort of told from the perspective of the mother of a woman who grows up to be this grand hero, sort of cool fighting wuxia style hero in ancient China, but it's told from the perspective of her mother, and the two of them really didn't get along, and there's a lot of sort of talk about like, oh, what I sacrificed for you, I never asked you to do that for me, what you did was horrible. It's a really interesting perspective because you don't see this cool like warrior princess like fight off the bad guys and rise to become a hero. You get the perspective of her life from her mother, who doesn't like her. It's really well done, and it's another one that really sort of gets you in the emotions and makes you sit there and think not about like, oh, the weirdness of the universe. It's more just sort of like, damn, the relationships we have with other people are insane in their complexity and sort of decisions that we have to make. It was interesting is that the mother sort of portrays herself as this self-sacrificing person who would commit great horrors just to make life okay for her daughter. But at the same time, you get the sense that she doesn't actually like her daughter that much, and she was maybe prone to doing sort of horrible things anyway. But at the same time, it's not sort of like a, oh, look at this horrible woman sort of way. It's just a really, really interesting character study for both of these women, and I really loved reading it. If you've gotten through this video of me talking about all these cool horror and dark fiction and creepy stories, but you're thinking to yourself, I'm not a big horror reader, I don't really like stuff that's sort of scary like that, or you have like specific tropes that crop up a lot in horror that you really want to avoid, like for personal reasons, or you just like hate them a lot, don't worry. I have compiled a list of content warnings for each of the stories. It's just in a Google Doc. I'll link it below. It'll also be on my Twitter. It just sort of like points out specific things that I know are issues for people. Some stuff that friends of mine have asked me to include before they read the book, because, you know, they have issues with certain topics that they just want to avoid if they can. And because all the stories are so vastly different, if you have like a certain trope or genre or even just, you know, event that you really, really want to avoid reading about, like 90% of the other stories will have none of that, and so you can just go ahead. Like I said, there's very little gore in this story, this book, except for the very first story. And I think that was kind of a smart idea from the editor, is to like sort of get that out of the way. It's like, this is the most amount of gore you'll ever have to deal with. So if you can deal with this first story, the rest of the book you're golden. And it's sort of like a similar principle with that. There's stories where if you don't like reading about children getting hurt, there are stories that have no kids in them, and there are stories that focus exclusively on the perspective of children. But the kids are alright, they just go through like a weird experience that makes them think a lot. If you have specific content warnings that you want to be warned about, and if you're like, oh, I have like a massive phobia of clowns, but you didn't mention any clowns in there, are there clowns? You can just like message me and I'll be like, there's no clowns in this one. I don't think there are any clowns in this one, but I wasn't like looking out for them. So feel free to ask me, and I'll add it to the list completely anonymously, so you don't have to worry about all that. So yeah, just check out the list if you're worried about potential things in horror stories or horror fiction that you want to avoid. I've tried to keep it like spoiler free, but like I said, the main experience of this anthology is the way that it makes you think about things. So even if you like read the content warnings, you're like, oh, I sort of like get the gist of the story from that. No, you haven't. You just read a bunch of stuff that's in the story. Please read the story to figure out like what it's talking about. But at the same time, if you're one of those people who's like, I cannot know anything about a story before I go in and read it or watch it or whatever, probably avoid the list then, because it's up to you whether you prioritize like being warned ahead of time of certain topics, or if you like to go in like completely blind. And that, I know that's part of the fun for some people, that it's like, oh, how am I going to get horrified this time? But as you might have noticed from some of my other discussions, I'm not exactly huge on a lot of like traditional horror. That's why I really like this anthology, because it's horror and dark fiction. It's about thinking, it's about new perspectives. And like there's a lot of horror that does that really well. I mean, obviously there was a big enough market for this book. And a lot of other Chrome Girls Press books are focused on similar sort of lingering feelings that make you think. But sometimes with like horror magazines, they'll publish like a wide spate of things, and like a lot of them just won't appeal to me. So if you're unfamiliar with the horror genre, or you just want warnings, please check out this list I made. And don't feel like just because you've read like, oh, your story has a girl that like vomits spiders, I get it now. I mean, you probably do get it, but I would like you to read it and like see what I say about it, And once you have read it, in either ebook or paperback form, both are available from big Amazon, but other online stores too. Just Google it. Once you have read it, I would absolutely adore hearing your thoughts about it. Obviously, posting on Goodreads and Storygraph would be really good for our publicity, because like I said, they're a small indie press. It's really good to like support indie creators, but in doing so, don't exactly have massive marketing budgets. You're not seeing banners for this on the side of a bus. So tweeting about it, posting it on Goodreads and stuff would be really cool. But if you don't want to like put in the effort of making your thoughts coherent, just like message me and just say what you liked about it. It doesn't even have to be about like my story or anything. Just be like, oh man, that story you mentioned, like the yogurt swimmer, that got me too. And I was like, oh, doesn't it fuck you up? And they're like, yeah. I want to have those conversations with people. Feel free to DM me on Twitter or Instagram. I just like talking about books. That's why I have a YouTube channel where I talk about books. And that's why I write books. I like talking. All writing is inherently communication, even if it's the author and reader are like massively separated, and like that's the extent of their communication ever, or it's just reader reading this one text that the author has written. That's still a communication, and I like to draw out that conversation. But obviously a lot of people like to read, and it's like, I'm reading this book, I'm done with this book, fuck the author, whatever they think about it, I don't care, I'm reading it, I'm getting my own enjoyment out of it, and that's it. And that's like a really good way to read too, because you're completely in the driver's seat of your experience. So if you read that way, drop me a line too and be like, I read your story, I'm not telling you anything about how I felt about it. I'd be like, damn, that's a ballsy move. Thanks for letting me know. So the publisher, Chrome Girls Press, like I said, indie publisher, and they're coming out with another anthology really soon. So if you're thinking of, maybe I want to get into a variety of horror, like I don't know a lot about horror, but I'm not super squeamish, I like the idea of it, I just like haven't engaged with it before. It would be a really cool idea for you to like purchase not only Coppice and Break, but also Stories We Tell After Midnight, Volume 1 and 2. Volume 2 is coming out really soon. Comes out on the 1st of October. So if you're looking forward to a fun Halloween reading challenge, maybe check out all the Chrome Girls Press anthologies. There's only 3 of them. Like I said, they're pretty slim. The stories themselves aren't massive. But just if you're looking for a wide variety of horror that gets you thinking, that like, explores unique potentials in stories that you might not have seen before, or if you're a horror newbie and you want like a wide spate of things, definitely check out this collection. Thanks so much for listening to me ramble about this for ages. It really means a lot to me, the opportunity to get published in a collection of stories that are so fascinating, that click so well with me, that like almost all of them are stories that I'd find on their own and be like, oh my god, look at this! like I sort of alluded to earlier, it's been kind of an insane year for me just on a personal level, not even to speak about the everything. So I appreciate you guys sticking with me. Hopefully I'll have another new video for you soon. I'm currently working through a collection of essays by Ursula Le Guin. This one, the collection is called The Language of the Night, which is, I think, just one of the titles of the pieces, but it's definitely a line from one of them. It's talking about how fantasy and spec fiction in general, but specifically fantasy, is the language of sort of the metaphor, the obscured, the dreams that we have sort of given life in words. And it's really interesting, and I highly recommend that too. If you're looking for something completely the opposite of a short story collection, go read a short essay collection talking about the sort of effects that are evoked in excellent spec fic. Sorry. I'm getting I filmed this on my phone, and I'm getting texts from my dad while he's in chemotherapy. He's handling it really well, but he's a dad, so he rocks up to chemo and he's like, "Same as last time, thanks, bartender." And I'm like, "You're getting injected with poisonous chemicals." I don't know. It's nice to see him being chipper, but at the same time, to read his texts, I have to be like, "Are you dying? Why are you texting me?"